The war on drugs. The war on drugs began with President Richard Nixon as he declared the drugs to be, in quotes, enemy number one. And he tried to promote this as stated by Adam Augustine in War on Drugs. However, when President Ronald Reagan came into office in 1981, the drug war increased, causing a massive increase in incarcerations over drugs. Along with President Reagan's efforts, his wife Nancy also started a campaign called Just Say No, which was designed to educate the children during the time on the dangers of drugs and how to avoid them. So, Nancy Reagan was also an influencer, but for the children. The Anti Drug Abuse Act of 1986 was set into play due to the presidency of Reagan and gave the war on drugs movement a budget of $1.7 billion. President Nixon had started this movement, and President Reagan was the one to expand it. Reagan made people feel afraid to sell and even use drugs. This is due to the prison time people received because of it. Cultural trends were a big reason behind why the government took action. The cultural trends of it, if something stresses you out, you should resort to drugs or alcohol. The trend that no one wants to hear about your emotions, no one cares about what you're going through. So society basically is what made people feel as if they were alone, and the only thing that temporarily eased the pain was the drug abuse. This shows how the trends are still prevalent to this day, as the government only scared people instead of helping them. The war on drugs started off rough as no one took the campaign seriously. But after the Anti Drug Abuse Act, which was in 1986, was set into play, everything changed. There were many arrests of big drug traffickers that took place and were executed to perfection. The president made ties with the head official of other countries to work together to decrease the smuggling of these drugs. The war on drugs was executed through more than just numbers and movements. There were these small achievements which resulted in these big victories. With each little victory that the United States had on the drug traffickers, the more and more changed. More people were afraid as they saw the country was taking big actions and caused less people to sell, even use the drugs. So with these small arrests, the government ties, the country actually began to change, and it gave these people a hope for a better country. As you can see the chart below, it shows how many people were found guilty of drug dealing. According to Julian Buchanan on a war of drug users, the chart showed from 1988 to 1998 of it just increasing more and more every year. And the chart started at 30,000 and it later went to 130,000 people, which is just astronomical. It really made me think about how much the government was not doing at the beginning to stop these drug abusers. So this shows the authority was heavily set into place with the police force. During the time of the war on drugs, African American men and women were attacked heavily because they were usually the main suspects. So this just caused the mistreatment of blacks to increase from the police. They were in some terms given a green light to do anything they wanted because the causing problems to rise in inequality. And as said by Lester L. Solicito in The War on Drugs, is a platform for racial inequality and unchecked police brutality. He says that, in quotes, the drug war is the American political and social policy cooking bowl in which to openly foment racism. And African Americans were very unhappy with this unjust treatment from the police, and it just gives me an understanding and point of view from African Americans during the time. And the war on drugs is challenging black men and women of the country because it has turned one problem to another, as it went from the abuse of drugs to the abuse of blacks by the police. So while the government of the United States is faced with the problem of declining drug abuse, but also declining the abuse of police. Riots along these protests uh, were occurring uh, because of this disarray. There were many obstacles that were faced in the war on drugs campaign, and the beginning of the campaign was pretty rough because the presidents were changed, so the transition was very different. Along with this, the campaign was criticized heavily by the people of the United States due to the fact that police brutality was increasing. And not only this, but the criticism of the time that people would face in jail if they were caught using or selling drugs was also criticized. And This just caused more riots, more protests to occur, and people felt like the government was failing them. However, even with these obstacles, the job was still completed as they decreased the use of drugs in the United States greatly. The president was changed. President problem was of Nixon passing it over to Reagan was actually a good thing as it expanded it. And the solution to the riots, protests were simply changed because they applied less power to the police and decreased the jail time. We're excited and some of the sources I used. And yeah, thank you.